What does it mean to flourish? What does a flourishing congregation look like? What are the pathways from stability to vitality, surviving to thriving? And what difference would it make for the world? These are weighty questions. And like all such questions, the answers depend on the collective aspirations of the congregation asking them, and its members' understanding of what they are called to be and to do in the world. So we naturally answer them differently than the other two congregations that occupy this corner of Wellington Crescent and Academy Road, not to mention the Academy itself that inspired the name of one of these streets. We will also answer these questions differently than other Unitarian Universalist congregations, whether across the country or across the continent, indeed around the world, notwithstanding our numerous similarities and common views. Each and every congregation is unique in some ways, even though it may share certain values and behaviors with kindred spirits, whether nearby or halfway around the globe. Back in the 80s, some of you may remember them, Canadian Unitarians spent a lot of time talking about contextual theology. That is, how the contexts in which we live influence the very core of our beliefs about the world, and how they shape the communities in which we gather. We imagined that there was something distinctive about how Unitarian Universalism is expressed in Canada, something that distinguished us from Unitarian Universalists elsewhere, without necessarily separating us from the larger movement. As we explored contextual theology, we also came to understand how the unique history and setting of a congregation influences its theological understanding and sense of mission. We may aspire to be universal, but we live amidst the particular, and we are inevitably influenced by our immediate surroundings, even as we, in turn, influence those surroundings by our own presence. This reminds us that while we can learn from the experiences and methods of other congregations, especially other congregations that share our values and participate in the larger liberal religious tradition, we are nevertheless fated to chart our own course, to decide what dreams we will emphasize, to determine what work we will do together, to define what our congregation will be at this particular place and in this particular time. We can borrow from other places. We can learn from others' experiences, but it is ultimately up to us to figure out who we are and what we will be. This is both the blessing and the burden of being a free religious community. I intentionally made myself scarce 3 weekends ago when Reverend Ann Barker visited us from the Canadian Unitarian Council. It's not that I don't like Ann. I love Ann. I hold Ann in very high regard as a colleague, and I care deeply about how members of this congregation feel, both individually and collectively. But I wanted you all to have an unfettered opportunity to engage with our denomination's congregational services representative without inadvertently influencing the discussion myself. I'm not averse to seeking attention, but I didn't want to be a distraction 3 weekends ago. I have more than my share of opportunities to influence what you are thinking and feeling, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtly, So I retreated to my study while you expressed your hopes and worries, sharing your aspirations for what this congregation might envision and do over the next 3 years, the next decade, perhaps the next generation. Anne arrived with an open mind about our circumstances and needs so that she could meet us where we were. Of course, she and I had opportunities to speak about the congregation before her arrival. We do talk about you at ministers' gatherings. And we spent several hours discussing its problems, its possibilities, and its potential during the course of her stay. But she also met with the board alone and then expertly facilitated a consultation with the congregation on Saturday morning. Many of you were there, perhaps most of you. Following the consultation, Anne and I met to debrief. The board met for its regular meeting 2 days later, and Allison Baird shared the meticulous notes she kept. So while I wasn't present for the consultation, I have some sense of the highlights. Names were named. Ideas were carefully noted. Themes were organized. Anne stressed that there was a hunger for vitality, a desire to create a congregation that was thriving and flourishing, which of course influenced the board's decision to make flourishing the theme of this year's annual stewardship campaign. How can we flourish together? Forget Shakespeare. That is the question. According to political analyst and historian Thomas Frank, who is perhaps best known for his insightful book, What's the Matter with Texas? What's the Matter with Kansas? A rather... I'm just going to stop and acknowledge that's a Freudian slip. And it reflects my personal prejudice against the relative merits of Kansas and Texas. In his book, What's the Matter with Kansas? One day we'll fix these states. I'm not even going to try it again. Thomas Frank, who has written other books, wrote, "Vibrancy is so universally desirable, so totemic in its powers, that even though we aren't sure what the word means, we know the quality it designates must be cultivated. The vibrant, we believe, is what makes cities flourish." What's true for cities is true for congregations. We long for vibrancy, whether we're talking about the vibrancy of a small cafe or gathering place, a neighborhood, or an entire city. Vibrancy is scalable. It's ultimately not a measure of quantity, but a mark of quality. Vibrancy is achievable by a boutique as well as a big box store, an open-air amphitheater as well as a grand auditorium, a library discussion group as well as a national broadcaster, a modestly sized but energetic congregation as well as a megachurch. It is a quality of life, not a statistical measure. Vibrancy, thriving, flourishing. Whatever we call it and whatever we imagine its component parts to be, it is a noble and worthy aspiration. Don't we all long to thrive, to flourish as best we can? We can become so fixated on ends, on accomplishments, on outward measures that we might actually fail to notice whether we're thriving or languishing, flourishing or withering. What I can tell you is that, like positivity, the state of flourishing is infectious in a good way. Or at least it contains within itself the germ that leads to generation and regeneration. It's something that grows once it sprouts. To flourish is simply a metaphor derived from the expression to flower. And the etymologist John Ato traces the usage of flourishing as a metaphor for thriving back to Geoffrey Chaucer's 14th century Parson's Tale. So it seems especially fitting as an aspiration for a religious community, even one as unconventional as our own, even one that is so skeptical of parsons as Unitarian Universalist congregations tend to be. I'd love to have a really flourishing vegetable garden, quipped Julie Andrews. And I'd love to have a better area for a rose garden or a cutting garden, but I don't. You have to develop a garden in the way that it's meant to be developed, she said. We flourish when we bloom, no matter how long it takes for us to develop, nor where we choose to burst forth in blossom. In religion, as in life, late bloomers are more common than we know. This congregation may be one. You may be surrounded at this very moment by other late bloomers who are discovering their gifts as artists or as friends. Their gifts for writing, or their gifts for simply sitting with others and being a presence. Their gifts for cooking, or perhaps carpentry. As the essential nature of any institution that transcends generations is to bloom and bloom again, the congregations that survive and thrive generation after generation, let's say for 135 years and counting, well, they're essentially perennials. They either reseed themselves or they put down such deep roots that they spring back again and again and again, braving winter after winter to show their blooming faces to the world each spring. Many a genius has been slow of growth, said George Henry Lewes. Oaks that flourished for 1,000 years did not spring up into beauty like a reed. As we enter our 135th year, this congregation stands as strongly as the old trees that shade it, the trees we saved when we moved here. Flourishing as both a metaphor and a measure of health fits nicely with Peter Stanke's understanding of congregations as organisms rather than merely institutions. To talk about a healthy congregation is to talk about a congregation from an organic perspective, he said. Only organisms can be said to be healthy or diseased. Organic processes are not linear. They are not merely progressive or expansive. Some organic processes promote growth through decay, shedding, breakdown. Some organic growth is downward, a deepening, a rooting, a maturing process. An organic view will not allow us to make health synonymous with enlargement and mass. Organic life comes in many sizes and shapes, all of which may be said to be healthy. I had the pleasure to learn from Peter Stanke while I was on the field staff of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and we brought him in as an outside consultant to guide us in using emotional systems theory in our work with congregations. In fact, one of my lingering regrets as having declined to provide illustrations for one of his books on the subject. You see, I tend to doodle when I take notes. It helps me focus and reflect on what I'm hearing. And being a disruptive student, I would share my doodles with the rest of the class, a group of cantankerous, middle-aged, and older denominational executives. When Peter saw some of the drawings during his presentations, he asked me to illustrate his upcoming book, but I lacked the artistic confidence to do so. I wish I had doodled my way into his writing. Anyway, he proved to be unflappable when it came to dealing with emotional systems in congregations, and his teaching had a significant influence on my work. Some of the things you may like about my ministerial style, and some of the things that may frustrate you, or even worse, are things I learned from him. In his book, Healthy Congregations, he pointed to 4 conditions that can negatively affect the health of a congregation, beginning with over-focusing on clergy at the expense of mission. The other 3 were avoiding painful events to the detriment of healing, adapting to weakness at the cost of integrity, and taking sides and hostages instead of engaging in the hard tasks of love. Now, this congregation isn't unique in any of those qualities, although over the course of 135 years, it has reflected every one of them. But mostly, this is a good, healthy place. So this morning, I'd like to concentrate on a few of the characteristic differences he found between mission-focused congregations and clergy-focused congregations, which I believe we can call cults. Because the primary difference between a mission-focused congregation and one that obsesses about its ministry is, well, rather cult-like. Now, this does have the assumption embedded that a mission focus is likely to produce healthier congregations. I know that you learned from Ann Barker's consultation with you that your work is more important than mine, and that ultimately you are collectively more responsible for this congregation flourishing than I am. Now, lest you worry that somehow my ego may have been hurt in this, let me reassure you that this has been the truth under every minister this congregation has ever had, and it is the truth for any congregation that is truly flourishing. The word liturgy, for instance, to describe what happens on Sunday mornings, is a Greek word that means the people's work. In our tradition, the congregation belongs to the people, and the work that it does is a feather in their cap, not the caps of others. And so he said that the characteristics of such a congregation includes a clear focus on identity and destiny instead of an excessive focus on ministry, the latter of which entails emotional overinvestment as ministers as either heroes or scapegoats. We love to be heroes, but being a scapegoat is a dangerous position to hold, especially during the Eastertide, when it is so easy to erect a cross and find someone to nail to it. Ministers are expected to motivate and rescue in unhealthy congregations rather than marshaling members to implement their own best vision, to live out their own best story. "Who do you think you are?" asked Robert Fulgham. "That's the big one, isn't it?" he reflects. "A flourishing life depends on how you answer that. That's true for individuals and it also works for congregations. Stanke also warns against meeting personal needs, or warns us to meet personal needs without promoting dependency. He tells us to be sensitive to vision instead of sensitive to mere consensus. The act of promoting harmony and uniformity over tolerating genuine and robust differences. Accepting conflict as healthy is a measure of a healthy congregation, whereas believing that disagreement is dangerous is as harmful to the life of a religious community as we are discovering it is to a whole society south of our border. Healthy congregations are resilient rather than inflexible. They emphasize stewardship, encouraging initiative, responsibility, and interdependence instead of encouraging dependency. And they strive to be open systems rather than closed systems. We welcome spiritual immigrants in this place, not only because it's good for us, but because it will be good for them. David Brooks, a conservative commentator in the New York Times, who I'm not generally accustomed to quoting, wrote that I've come to think that flourishing consists of putting yourself in situations in which you lose self-consciousness and become fused with other people, experiences, or tasks. In a word, when you immerse yourself in the shared work of a congregation, so much so, so deeply, so enthusiastically that you sometimes forget what you're doing. With the theme of this year's stewardship campaign, our board is essentially declaring that we will cherish our past but not relive it. We will learn from past conflicts but not relitigate them. We will acknowledge our disappointments but not let them define who we are moving forward. This congregation has known growing times and withering times, stable times and tumultuous times, easy times and challenging times, but it has continued to flourish, to blossom through all of these times. And we will continue to do so through whatever vicissitudes we may yet encounter together. And so we will let all of this and more be the soil in which we grow. But it's springtime, and we're going to bloom, because that's what organisms do in the spring when the winter has passed. Flourishing times beyond happiness or satisfaction with life, maintains Barbara Fredrickson. True, people who flourish are happy, but that's not the half of it. Beyond feeling good, they're also doing good, adding value to the world. And so today, we will build upon the countless ways this congregation has thrived as we strive to flourish forward. Please join in hymn number 288, All Are Architects.